Alberta has a big problem. Its 51,000 teachers were already so upset with the state of contract talks that they had actually stopped teaching.
It means more than 700,000 students in public, separate, and francophone schools are not in class.
It is beyond unacceptable what I've seen in my classroom of 41 kids in each class. I can't do my job to the best of my own ability.
But then, not only did the government finally say enough and order teachers back to work under threat of massive fines because they say kids gotta learn, but they've also preemptively neutralized the teachers' ability to fight back by effectively flipping a constitutional kill switch, saying your charter right to strike and bargain don't apply here. And now even non-teacher unions across the province are saying in solidarity, oh no, you did not just do that. To paint you that picture, it's like teachers and the government were playing a board game and the teachers were like, hey, you just broke a rule in the game. And the government flips the table and is like, what game? We're not playing that game anymore because don't you see the house is on fire? And then the teachers are like, what house? Forget the house. Don't you see the stampede of elephants outside you've just provoked by flipping the table? And now we're left wondering, how did we get to this point? And which side is right? I think no matter where in this country you live these days, teachers inevitably come up against 3 points of great friction.
It's hard to get by on the income I make.
The class sizes are way too big.
Most of my children are below grade level at reading, and I can't fix that when I don't have the support in my classroom.
Pay, class size, and class composition. All three are factors in this Alberta dispute, but the ones getting the most attention really seem to be about quality of life in the classroom.
English as a second language, cognitive issues, behavioral issues. And they're saying class size doesn't always reflect that. If you have like 40 kids in the class, that's overwhelming most teachers. You could have 20 in a class, but if they have behavioral issues or don't understand English very well, that's an overwhelming issue for teachers.
I'll give you an example of a sticking point. The last tentative agreement that union leadership and the government agreed to, but which union members overwhelmingly voted to reject. It set a goal of hiring 1,000 new full-time teachers in each of the next 3 years. So that's 3,000 new teachers by 2028. But the Alberta Teachers Association position is that you'd need nearly that many over that time span just in Calgary alone. Never mind how many you'd need for the province as a whole. So they're effectively saying, come on, we actually need to move the needle. And the government is saying, but we don't have the literally billions of extra dollars to do what you're asking for, and so we can't just put arbitrary caps on class sizes, for example. So that's one point of disagreement. Another is around classroom composition. The government acknowledges things are tough in classrooms today with the increasing demands of students with labor-intensive or specialized needs. Teachers are saying, we need support. We're burning out. We're not properly equipped to handle this volume of children with mental or physical or behavioral challenges. And the government's saying, we hear you, we're studying the problem, but still waiting on a firm action plan. And just remember, again, we don't have billions of extra dollars to invest in the system, and effectively, we're doing what we can.
It's the Grand Canyon of divides. It's gigantic.
The closest the two sides have gotten to a deal was for a 3% pay raise per year, those 3,000 new full-time teachers I mentioned by 2028, plus 1,500 new teaching assistants, free COVID shots for teachers, and a promise to try to address the issue of class sizes, but falling short of any kind of concrete guarantee.
The end of the strike does not bring an end to the teachers' concerns raised through the bargaining process, and we are addressing those concerns head on. This means immediately collecting and publicly reporting on class size and composition. Numbers and data help provide clarity, and this information will guide government's immediate and future policy.
But about 90% of teachers voted to reject this agreement. That was in late September, and that ultimately triggered the strike, which began October 6th, and which had kept kids out of schools for about 3 weeks.
The proposed agreement failed to meet the needs of teachers, failed to improve student classroom conditions in a concrete and meaningful way, and failed to show teachers the respect they deserve.
Deciding enough was enough. The government did not one, not two, but three fairly provocative things. The first was to legislatively force teachers back to work.
The Alberta government passed a bill in the early hours of this morning ending a 3-week-long teachers' strike. The province introduced the legislation yesterday using the notwithstanding clause.
Taken the nuclear option on something that they could have avoided. And Albertans will be forgiven for asking themselves, who's next?
This was itself a process involving a lot of drama.
If this government is willing to violate the rights of so many of its citizens in this instance, what is to stop them from doing it in additional instances? This is how fascism progresses.
But the governing UCP, the United Conservative Party under Danielle Smith, they have a majority, 47 of 87 seats, and were repeatedly able to cut debate short, pushing this back-to-work legislation through its successive phases fairly quickly.
Not more than 1 hour shall be allotted to any further consideration of the motion.
The second part of the government's back-to-work legislation, though, was to impose the terms of that last contract deal that teachers had rejected. So there's this 1-2 punch of saying, get back to work, but also saying, and the negotiations are over. You're taking the last deal we reached. But then the third thing the government decided to do would up the stakes even further, bestowing upon itself a kind of constitutional shield, or anti-constitutional shield, depending on your point of view.
It also invokes the notwithstanding clause to help ensure stability for the school system moving forward. Mr. Speaker, I move first reading of Bill 2, the Back to School Act.
So the reason you have so many people booing and yelling shame at the government here is because the notwithstanding clause is what allows provinces to do unconstitutional things. And make no mistake, what the government just did is, on one level, unconstitutional. Section 2D of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms states very simply, everyone has the following fundamental freedoms: freedom of association. That's the right to form groups, like unions, forming collectives, and then, importantly, being allowed to do things that such collectives do, like go on strike, and then especially to bargain as a collective, which is arguably one of the most significant collective activities through which freedom of association is expressed. Because otherwise, what's the point of associating freely if you can't do the thing you associated for?
So many of the things we take for granted about workers' rights, about the condition of work, are a result of collective bargaining and the availability of unions to provide a collective power for workers to balance the otherwise overwhelming economic power of employers.
So when the government said, get back to work and here's your new deal, this breached the teachers' most basic constitutional rights. And the normal course of things might then be for the teachers to challenge this government approach in the courts.
It would involve essentially, is this a legitimate purpose for overriding it? Were there other alternatives that would have met the government's purpose that were less infringing of this key charter right? The government will have to convince the court that it is doing more good than harm.
So the government might argue before a judge, look, this strike has gone on for 3 weeks. At best, this has been highly disruptive to parents, it has set students back, and at worst, it creates a long-lasting harm that cannot be allowed to continue. Plus, we've exhausted every other alternative. But invoking the notwithstanding clause is what shields the government from needing to abide by Canadian constitutional law.
And this is where the phrase comes from, notwithstanding that section of the charter. This law can continue to exist even though it might interfere or does interfere with, say, the equality rights or freedom of religion or some other important aspect of the charter.
The interesting thing here is that one interpretation of the government invoking this legal shield is that they know very well how difficult and or costly their case may be to defend. And just to be clear, I don't mean to pass judgment on their reasons for doing so. Their point of view is that not only do they need the strike action to end and for students to get back to school, but that this cannot be allowed to go on endlessly.
Our government will not allow Alberta students to lose another day of learning. This legislation is the solution. It restores balance. It delivers a fair agreement and functional outcomes. And most importantly, it restores hope for parents and students who have waited long enough.
And ultimately, what the government wants is stability. But to secure that stability, the government is unwilling to proceed through normal channels, and absolving itself from the need to legally defend its position is seen by critics as a severe overreach.
Just taking away the constitutionally protected right of teachers to go on strike. And they're saying she isn't going to stop there. Smith says, I will stop there. They're saying they don't believe her, and they think that she is trampling on the rights of workers, and it won't end with teachers.
And so we have the beginnings of a potential spiral. There are about 51,000 teachers involved in this dispute, but a coalition of unions representing about 400,000 public and private sector workers has issued an ultimatum calling on Albertans to resist. We will text you with updates on unfolding and potentially escalating protest and resistance action. What's clear is that the two sides are on a collision course with each other. On the one hand, the Alberta Federation of Labour calling the government's move a declaration of war on organized labour, and the government insisting this is no such thing. We have seen provincial governments go this route and then backtrack before. Ontario comes to mind when Doug Ford did almost this exact thing with striking education workers. But in the meantime, the stakes are very high, especially for teachers. If they decide to break the law and stay on strike, the fine is $500 a day. And for the union itself, up to $500,000 a day.